Welcome to part 2 of this special edition of Jane Austen On Point, where, instead of our usual analysis of dancing in Jane Austen film and TV adaptations, we're looking directly at the books to show how historical dance researchers can use Jane Austen's dance scenes as a primary source of information about how dancing actually worked in Regency England. If you haven't seen part 1 of this video, which was produced as part of Virtual JaneCon 2021, I strongly recommend that you watch it before you continue with this, because it goes over the methodology of researching for historical dancing, as well as an intro into what English country dancing looked like in the Regency, which was different to how modern English country dance is done today. Don't worry, I'll still be here when you finish. By the way, I'm hoping to make a video soon about why modern English country dance is so different from the Regency version, which has to do with the folk dance revival of the early 20th century, so please leave a comment if you're interested in learning about that. I may bump it up in the production order if there's enough interest. So just to recap, in addition to giving an intro to Regency English country dance and Dance Research 101, the previous video also covered the novels Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Northanger Abbey. So if you're interested in the dance details that are of historical interest in those books, you can find them there. Notice I didn't say I'm covering all the dance references in the Jane Austen canon, just those that give historically interesting details. The first novel I want to look at today is Mansfield Park. To begin with, we have a fascinating impromptu dance that happens earlier in the novel. It was while all the other young people were dancing, and she sitting, most unwillingly, amongst the chaperones at the fire, longing for the re-entrance of her elder cousin, on whom all her hopes of a partner then depended. It was Fanny's first ball, though without the preparation or splendor of many a young lady's first ball, being the thought of only an afternoon, built on the late acquisition of a violin player in the servants' hall, and the possibility of raising 5 couple with the help of Mrs. Grant and a new intimate of Mr. Bertram's just arrived on a visit. It had, however, been a very happy one to Fanny through 4 dances, and she was quite grieved to be losing even a quarter of an hour. The first thing I noticed is how eagerly and readily they can put together a dance when they found that they had a fiddle player amongst the servants. They only found out in the afternoon, and by evening they had rounded up enough people for a dance set. I mentioned in my analysis of Emma that Jane Austen is of the opinion, and in my experience, I tend to agree with her, that you really need 5 couples to make an impromptu Regency long ways English country dance satisfying, although you can technically make it work with as few as 3 couples. And if you have very few people, you could forego country dancing entirely and just dance reels instead, which only requires 3 or 4 people total. The second thing that strikes me about this scene is that although we join the action when Fanny is sitting out a dance, it says that she had enjoyed 4 dances before that. She's waiting for Tom Bertram, her eldest cousin, to come back because everyone else is dancing, and I infer this to be a similar situation to the one Harriet has in Emma, where one of the men steps away and it leaves one of the ladies without a partner, and Fanny, being the youngest and the lowest ranked lady, gets left out. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but same-gender dancing was indeed allowed in the Regency, although it was considered something of a last resort for the unpartnered, and Jane Austen herself danced with female friends when there weren't enough gentlemen to dance with, as evidenced from her letters. There was a scarcity of men in general, and a still greater scarcity of any that were good for much. I danced 9 dances out of 10, 5 with Stephen Terry, T-Shoot, Hams, Digweed, and 4 with Catherine. There was commonly a couple of ladies standing up together, but not often any so amiable as ourselves. Returning to the passage from Mansfield Park once again, we can see Austen's assumption of a dance lasting about 15 minutes, which I mentioned in my previous video because that's how long Fanny expects to wait out for one dance for her cousin. The rest of the dance details that I find to be of interest take place during the ball scene, so let's fast forward to that. The first thing I notice comes when Fanny is informed that she will lead off the ball. Sir Thomas brought him to her, saying something which discovered to Fanny that she was to lead the way and open the ball, an idea that had never occurred to her before. Whenever she had thought of the minutiae of the evening, it had been a matter of course that Edmund would begin with Miss Crawford, and the impression was so strong that though her uncle spoke the contrary, she could not help an exclamation of surprise, a hint of her unfitness, an entreaty even to be excused. To be urging her opinion against Sir Thomas was proof of the extremity of the case. But such was her horror at the first suggestion that she could actually look him in the face and say that she hoped it might be settled otherwise. In vain, however, Sir Thomas smiled, tried to encourage her, and then looked too serious and said too decidedly, "It must be so, dear," for her to hazard another word, and she found herself the next moment conducted by Mr. Crawford to the top of the room, and standing there to be joined by the rest of the dancers, couple after couple, as they were formed. The ball began. It was rather honor than happiness to Fanny for the first dance at least. Her partner was in excellent spirits and tried to impart them to her, but she was a great deal too much frightened to have any enjoyment until she could suppose herself no longer looked at. Young, pretty, and gentle, however, she had no awkwardnesses that were not as good as graces. Earlier in the novel, they had spoken of this ball as Fanny's coming out ball, which is why she gets to lead off the first dance. Though because she was brought up as a poor relation, she isn't aware of what coming out entails and doesn't think she deserves the attention. But it was pretty standard for young ladies to be given the distinction of calling the first dance of their coming out ball. This is probably a double horror to the shy Fanny, because not only does it mean that all eyes will be on her, but she will have to choose the tune and the figures as well. The line about her not being able to enjoy herself until she was no longer being looked at probably means either until she gets to the bottom of the set, or until she's gone down far enough that people could start watching other couples dancing down as well. As I said in my previous video, Regency English country dancing involved a lot of waiting around without much to do while the active couples danced down, so it was common to watch and comment on their dancing. I also take note that while they are dancing down, Mr. Crawford tries to impart high spirits to Fanny, and I infer this effort to be primarily through nonverbal means, such as encouraging smiles and energetic dancing, because people did not tend to have long conversations when they were dancing down the set. As I explained in part 1, and as is borne out by the ballroom conversations in both Pride and Prejudice and Northanger Abbey, which pause while the couples dance down and then resume. It was very much built into the format of Regency English country dances that dancers going up the set were relatively inactive compared to those dancing down, and would use that time moving up for conversation, whereas while dancing down and considered the active couple, they would concentrate on dancing because they knew people would be looking at them, and the sequence of figures couldn't be memorized in advance. English country dances then didn't have preset dances with choreographies for the most part. There were one or two exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, it was just that the lady chose a set of figures and paired them with a tune, and you would have to learn it on the spot. And speaking of Fanny dancing down the set, the next passage of interest occurs in the next paragraph while Fanny is still dancing down. Sir Thomas himself was watching her progress down the dance with much complacency. He was proud of his niece. Miss Crawford saw much of Sir Thomas's thoughts as he stood, and having, in spite of all his wrongs towards her, a general prevailing desire of recommending herself to him, took in the opportunity of stepping aside to say something agreeable of Fanny. Her praise was warm, and he received it as she could wish, joining in it as far as discretion and politeness and slowness of speech would allow, and certainly appearing to greater advantage on the subject than his lady did soon afterwards, when Mary, perceiving her on a sofa very near, turned round before she began to dance to compliment her on Miss Price's looks. Just as we observed in part 1 of this video, where the inactive couples dancing up the set have leisure to converse not just with their partner but with spectators nearby, once again we see interactions between dancers and spectators when Mary Crawford is able to talk to both Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram, despite being in a set with Edmund because, as the narrator tells us, she hadn't started dancing yet. I realize that the fact that Mary is in the dance set may not be readily apparent to modern readers, but remember that this is still the first dance, and she promised earlier to dance the first two with Edmund. The implication is clearly not that she's waiting for the dance to begin, but rather that she's waiting within the dance set to become the active couple. And the fact that Mary only has to turn around to talk to Lady Bertram sitting on a sofa makes me think that the seating was quite close to the dancers. You know, I didn't put this in the script, but I just have to stop to think about the fact that they had a sofa right next to the dancing. Like, that just really blows my mind, because as a dancer and as someone who goes to balls regularly, like, we don't really want spectators that close to your dancers. You want to have some space between them. Like, there are collisions. It happens. And especially like back then, English country dancing was kind of rowdy. Like, I just think it's an interesting detail. Another passage of interest comes later in the scene when we get to hear Fanny's interior thoughts about the ball. Fanny had a good deal of enjoyment in the course of the evening, but Henry's attentions had very little to do with it. She would much rather not have been asked by him again so very soon, and she wished she had not been obliged to suspect that his previous inquiries of Mrs. Norris about the supper hour were all for the sake of securing her at that part of the evening. But it was not to be avoided. I really loved this detail about the custom that your last partner before supper would attend you through the meal, a custom which we have already seen in Emma and which we will see again in the Watsons. Minor spoilers. So, I love reading that Henry Crawford was trying to find out when they plan to have supper so that he knows when to ask Fanny to dance again. That's some conniving. In a good way, I mean. Here's another little gem from the end of the ball. When her 2 dances with him were over, her inclination and strength for more were pretty well at an end, and Sir Thomas, having seen her walk rather than dance down the shortening set, breathless and with her hand at her side, gave his orders for her sitting down entirely. I notice a few things in this scene. First, the fact that she's walking the figures instead of using footwork was as strong a sign of fatigue as the breathlessness and the side cramp, which we still recognize today as exercise fatigue, and that says a lot about how important footwork was back then. The second thing that I note is the shortening set, which indicates to me that it's probably quite late and that the guests have started to go home or have become too tired for dancing. Private balls could literally go all night and sometimes did, though of course you would expect the number of dancers to dwindle as time went on. From the write-ups of private balls that I've read about in newspapers from the period, which, by the way, can be accessed online via the British Newspaper Archive, it was common for dancing to last until 4 or 5 or even 6 in the morning. In fact, in the following passage, William Price seems to expect the dancing to last at least until 5. "Poor Fanny!" cried William, coming for a moment to visit her, and working away his partner's fan as if for life. "How soon she is knocked up! Why, the sport is but just begun. I hope we shall keep it up these 2 hours. How can you be tired so soon?" "So soon, my good friend," said Sir Thomas, producing his watch with all necessary caution. "It is 3 o'clock, and your sister is not used to these sort of hours." That concludes my look at Mansfield Park. The next book on my list is Sense and Sensibility, which isn't exactly known for its riveting ballroom scenes, but actually contains a few good details that I appreciate. The first one I want to look at is a quote of Sir John Middleton describing Mr. Willoughby. "He's a good sort of fellow, I believe, as ever lived," repeated Sir John. "I remember last Christmas, a little hop down at the park. He danced from 8 o'clock till 4 without once sitting down." 8 till 4, my word. See what I mean about them going all night? Keeping on the subject of Willoughby and Marianne, let's look at how Austen describes them dancing. If dancing formed the amusement of the night, they were partners for half the time, and when obliged to separate for a couple of dances, were careful to stand together and scarcely spoke a word to anybody else. Such conduct made them, of course, most exceedingly laughed at, but ridicule could not shame, and seemed hardly to provoke them. Austen is clearly saying that Willoughby and Marianne not only shouldn't have been dancing together that much, but also that they had been transparently making sure that they stood next to each other in the long way set so that they could talk to each other instead of to their partners while inactive, which would have been the height of rudeness. Talking while you were moving up the dance set was considered to be an integral part of the social element of English country dancing in the Regency. The next notable passage comes when the Dashwood sisters are in London, and it details the different customs around private balls in London versus the country, which Sir John Middleton doesn't seem to understand. Elinor found, when the evening was over, that disposition is not materially altered by a change of abode, for although scarcely settled in town, Sir John had contrived to collect around him nearly 20 young people to amuse themselves with a ball. This was an affair, however, which Lady Middleton did not approve. In the country, an unpremeditated dance was very allowable, but in London, where a reputation of elegance was more important and less easily attained, it was risking too much for the gratification of a few girls to have it known that Lady Middleton had given a small dance of 8 or 9 couple with 2 violins in a mere sideboard collation. Lady Middleton is afraid of hurting her social standing if it gets out that she hosted a small ball that wasn't well attended or suitably grand. Private balls were often written up in London newspapers, and the elegance of the venue would be under close scrutiny. There was also just a lot less need for impromptu dancing in London because there were so many more opportunities to dance than there were in the country, from the numerous assembly rooms to the hundreds of members of the fashionable society who hosted balls, and even pleasure gardens like Vauxhall and Ranelagh, though dancing at a pleasure garden wasn't exactly exclusive. Moving on to the next passage, I often think that Sense and Sensibility has some of Austen's best comic characters, and none more so than the foppish Robert Ferrars, who makes this absurdly privileged speech to Elinor. Some people imagine that there can be no accommodation, no space in a cottage, but this is all a mistake. I was last month at my friend Elliot's near Dartford. Lady Elliot wished to give a dance. But how can it be done? Said she. My dear Ferrars, do tell me how it is to be managed. There is not room in this cottage that will hold 10 couple. And where can the supper be? I immediately saw that there could be no difficulty in it. So I said, my dear Lady Elliot, do not be uneasy. The dining parlour will admit 18 couple with ease. Card tables may be placed in the drawing room. The library may be open for tea and other refreshments. And let the supper be set out in the saloon. Lady Elliot was delighted with the thought. We measured the dining room and found it would hold exactly 18 couple, and the affair was arranged precisely after my plan. So that, in fact, you see, if people do but know how to set about it, every comfort may well be enjoyed in a cottage as in the most spacious dwelling. Clearly, if your cottage has a library and a saloon, in addition to having a dining room big enough for a set of 18 couples for English country dancing, that is not a cottage. Please see part 1 of this video for my formula of calculating space for English country dancing if you want some idea of just how big this dining parlor would have to be to accommodate 18 couples. But without going into details, it's about 144 square meters or 450 square feet of dance space alone, not counting the margins needed for spectators and musicians. That's a big room, people. Anyway, that wraps up the passages of note in Sense and Sensibility. Moving on now, let's look at the Watsons. Of all Austen's unpublished works, the Watsons has a particularly interesting ballroom scene. I know not a lot of people bother reading this fragment of a novel, but it has a few passages I find very enlightening. To begin with, let's look at this passage from when the protagonist, Emma Watson, no, not that Emma Watson, overhears a conversation between dances. You will not be surprised at Charles' impatience, said Mrs. Blake, a lively, pleasant-looking little woman of 5 or 6 and 30, to a lady who was standing near her, when you know what a partner he is to have. Miss Osborne has been so very kind as to promise to dance the first 2 dances with him. Oh, yes, we have been engaged this week, cried the boy, and we are to dance down every couple. On the other side of Emma, Miss Osborne, Miss Carr, and a party of young men were standing engaged in very lively consultation, and soon afterwards she saw the smartest officer of the set walking off to the orchestra to order the dance, while Miss Osborne, passing before her little expecting partner, hastily said, Charles, I beg your pardon for not keeping my engagement, but I'm going to dance these 2 dances with Colonel Beresford. I know you will excuse me, and I will certainly dance with you after tea. And without staying for an answer, she turned again to Miss Carr, and in another minute was led by Colonel Beresford to begin the set. If the poor little boy's face in its happiness had been interesting to Emma, it was infinitely more so under this sudden reverse. He stood the picture of disappointment, with crimson cheeks, quivering lips, and eyes bent on the floor. His mother, stifling her own mortification, tried to soothe his with the prospect of Miss Osborne's second promise. But though he contrived to utter, with an effort of boyish bravery, "Oh, I do not mind it," it was very evident by the unceasing agitation of his features that he minded it as much as ever. First of all, oh my gosh, that little boy is so adorable. I love him saying that they were going to dance down every couple, because why would they leave the dance in the middle of the set? The second thing I noticed is that Miss Osborne backing out of her dance with Charles is so low. She thinks she can get away with it because Charles is a child, but she would never dream of treating an adult man like that. Some dance venues expressly prohibit turning down one person to dance the same dance with another. And if nothing else, it was universally considered rude. Actually, I forgot to mention this, but in the novel Evelina from the 1770s by Frances Burney, the heroine actually suffers complete mortification for the entire novel because she made the faux pas of turning down one man and then saying yes to another for the same dance. So this is kind of a big deal, people. This is a big piece of rudeness, and Miss Osborne is only getting away with this because Charles is a child and she's the sister of a lord. And the reason she turned him down is because this is the last dance before tea, so whoever her partner is for that dance will attend her through the meal. This was very similar to the way Crawford was trying to figure out when the last dance before supper was at Fanny's coming out ball so that he could be sure to ask her. Anyway, to get back to this novel, Miss Osborne clearly prefers to have an eligible officer attend her through a meal than a little boy. I also noticed the part where Miss Osborne and her friends are in consultation, and then Miss Osborne's dance partner goes off to order a dance for her. That's because Miss Osborne, as the sister of Lord Osborne, is entitled to call a dance, meaning choosing the tune and the figures, which is why her partner goes off to communicate her desires to the appropriate person. This is one of the few instances in which the process of calling a dance is seen in an Austen novel, so it's interesting in that regard. But let's continue our perusal of this passage. Emma did not think or reflect. She felt and acted. "I shall be very happy to dance with you, sir, if you like it," she said, holding out her hand with the most unaffected good humor. The boy, in one moment restored to all his first delight, looked joyfully at his mother, and stepping forward with an honest and simple "Thank you, ma'am," was instantly ready to attend his new acquaintance. The thankfulness of Mrs. Blake was more diffuse, with a look most expressive of unexpected pleasure and lively gratitude. She turned to her neighbor with repeated and fervent acknowledgments of so great and condescending a kindness to her boy. Emma, with perfect truth, could assure her that she could not be giving greater pleasure than she felt herself, and Charles, being provided with his gloves and charged to keep them on, then joined the set, which was now rapidly forming with nearly equal complacency. It was a partnership which could not be noticed without surprise. It gained her a broad stare from Miss Osborne and Miss Carr as they passed her in the dance. "Upon my word, Charles, you are in luck," said the former as she turned to him. "You have got a better partner than me," to which the happy Charles answered, "Yes." Tom Musgrove, who was dancing with Miss Carr, gave her many inquisitive glances. After a time, Lord Osborne himself came, and under the pretense of talking to Charles, stood to look at his partner. Though rather distressed by such observation, Emma could not repent what she had done. So happy had it made both the boy and his mother, the latter of whom was continually making opportunities of addressing her with the warmest civility. Her little partner, she found, though bent chiefly on dancing, was not unwilling to speak when her questions or remarks gave him anything to say, and she learnt, by a sort of inevitable inquiry, that he had 2 brothers and a sister, and that they and their mamma lived with his uncle at Wixhead, that his uncle taught him Latin, that he was very fond of riding, that he had a horse of his own given him by Lord Osborne, and that he had been out once already with Lord Osborne's hounds. The first thing that strikes me is that Emma is a newcomer and has not been introduced to any of Charles' family, so it's very forward of her to ask him to dance. Again, I think she can probably get away with a bit more informality because Charles is a young child. It's not like the chaperones would be afraid of an unsuitable man becoming acquainted with an unmarried girl in this case. I also love that a child like Charles is much more interested in the actual dancing than in talking during the inactivity. It shows just how important the conversation that inactivity afforded was to the courtship process, and how a child would be totally oblivious oblivious to this. I also really love the detail of Charles being handed his gloves and told to keep them on, because it's just like a child not to want to wear all the fancy clothes that they would find restrictive. And from what I've read of ballroom etiquette guides, gloves were a necessary part of ballroom attire. What's chiefly of interest in this paragraph, however, is that both Lord Osborne and Charles's mother come over to talk to them while they're waiting in the set, similar to what we saw in Northanger Abbey, Pride and Prejudice, and Mansfield Park. Until I started doing research for this video, I had no idea that it was so common for spectators to talk to people in the dance set. Now, let's rejoin the action. At the end of these dances, Emma found that they were to drink tea. On entering the tea room, in which 2 long tables were prepared, Lord Osborne was to be seen quite alone at the end of one, as if retreating as far as he could from the ball to enjoy his own thoughts and gape without restraint. Charles instantly pointed him out to Emma. "There's Lord Osborne. Let you and I go and sit by him." "No, no," said Emma, laughing. "You must sit with my friends." Charles was now free enough to hazard a few questions in his turn. "What o'clock was it?" 11. 11? And I am not at all sleepy. Mamma said I should be asleep before 10. Again, this is something we see in Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park, that a gentleman was supposed to attend to his last dance partner during the tea or supper break, and he had to sit with her social group. Additionally, I find the remark about the time both charming and informative, because Emma dances with Charles for the second 2 dances of the evening, meaning that they danced 4 dances total before tea. If we assume that the meal came at the halfway point, that would mean that they could fit in about 8 dances total for the whole evening, which accords with what Thomas Wilson says in his etiquette, in which he assumes that there will be 8 dances, but gives provisions if there's time for a 9th. Hey everyone, I'm recording this during post. When I went to put in the citation for this, I realized that it was actually Edward Payne's ballroom etiquette from 1814's A New Companion to the Ballroom, and not Thomas Wilson, who talks about what to do if there's a 9th dance during the evening. I wanted to do a full proper citation for this, but unfortunately the only copy available is in the British Library and it hasn't been digitized. There is a way for me to order a digital scan of it, but unfortunately they're currently not accepting requests for digital scans, and I don't want to delay this video even further since, as you can see, I recorded it while I was still living in my old apartment. Therefore, I'm going to cite Paul Cooper's excellent research paper on Regency ballroom etiquette, which quotes the passage in question. At some balls, it is their rule to give the couple number 1 also number 9. Then 2 of that number is requisite in case the time will permit of 9 dances. The 9th couple is entitled to call before number 1. The reason of the couple receiving also number 9 is to prevent them from being at or near the bottom the whole of the evening, as in some parties it is an honor conferred on the couple to lead off the first dance, and at others again it is obliging the master of ceremonies to lead off the first dance. This passage gives me a lot of interesting information about dancing. The whole "in case time will permit of a 9th dance" makes it feel as if 8 dances is the expected standard, and the explanation for why the first couple should also be given the 9th spot so that they don't have to spend the rest of the evening at the bottom of the set shows how that distinction comes with some disadvantages. I also find the detail that the dancing master sometimes leads off the first dance interesting, as the implication seems to be that it's to prevent the problem of the first couple spending the whole rest of the evening near the bottom. Skipping to the end of tea, let's pick up the action again. She heard Lord Osborne, who was lounging on a vacant table near her, call Tom Musgrove towards him and say, "Why do you not dance with that beautiful Emma Watson? I want you to dance with her, and I will come stand by you." "I was determining this very moment, my lord. I'll be introduced and dance with her directly." "I do. And if you find she does not want much talking to, you may introduce me by and by." Wow, what an entitled attitude. Well, I guess he is a peer, so he's literally entitled in as much as that he has an actual title. But anyway, the only thing I really noticed is, once again, Lord Osborne's intention to stand by the dancers and observe them, and just how free spectators felt to crowd around and talk with the couples dancing in the set. Moving right along, let's hear Emma's reaction to this speech. Emma, however she might like to be thought beautiful by lord or commoner, was so little disposed to favor Tom Musgrove himself that she had considerable satisfaction in avowing her previous engagement. He was evidently surprised and discomposed. The style of her last partner had probably led him to believe her not overpowered with applications. "My little friend Charles Blake," he cried, "must not expect to engross you the whole evening. We can never suffer this. It's against the rules of the assembly, and I am sure it would never be patronized by our good friend here, Mrs. Edwards. She is by much too nice a judge of decorum to give her license to such dangerous particularity." Notice the reference to the formal rules of assembly and the expectation that everybody change partners, which appears frequently in assembly room rules. The next passage of note comes after Emma has turned down Tom Musgrove. The dancing now recommenced. Miss Carr being impatient to call, everyone was required to stand up, and Tom Musgrove's curiosity was appeased on seeing Mr. Howard come forward and claim Emma's hand. "That will do well for me," was Lord Osborne's remark, when his friend carried him the news, and he was continually at Howard's elbow during the two dances. The frequency of his appearance there was the only unpleasant part of the engagement, and the only objection she could make to Mr. Howard. The first thing I notice here is the reference to Miss Carr's calling the dance. The term calling can be a little confusing because in modern parlance, calling a dance means prompting the figures for the other dancers and is often done by someone who isn't dancing themselves. But that's not what it meant in the Regency. As I've explained before, calling in the Regency meant the First Lady's right to choose the dance tune and a series of figures to go with them. If there was only going to be 8 or 9 dances in the course of an evening, obviously not every lady would get the chance to call, and it was considered to be a big deal if you did. I mentioned earlier that ladies of rank were entitled to precedence when calling, which is why Miss Osborne, who's the sister of Lord Osborne, gets to call after their party arrives. And now her friend Miss Carr gets to call the next. For people who weren't ladies of rank, there were various other methods for deciding, including being given a card with a number on it as you entered, or simply on a first-come, first-served basis for those who stood up to dance, with the understanding that you wouldn't get to call twice in one night, of course. Anyway, I don't blame Miss Carr for being so impatient to call her dance. I would be too. The other thing I noticed was Lord Osborne passive-aggressively hanging out near his friends while they danced with Emma, which isn't at all creepy or presumptuous, but goes to show once again that interacting between dancers and spectators was super common. Well, that concludes the ballroom scene for my purposes, but let's flash forward to Emma going home from the ball with her friends, the Edwardses. "So you ended up with Captain Hunter, Mary, did you?" said her father. "And whom did you begin with?" "Captain Hunter," was repeated in a very humble tone. That is being constant, however. But who else did you dance with?" "Mr. Norton and Mr. Stiles." "And who are they?" "Mr. Norton is a cousin of Captain Hunter's." "And who is Mr. Stiles?" "One of his particular friends." "All in the same regiment," added Mrs. Edwards. "Mary was surrounded by redcoats all evening. I should have been better pleased to see her dancing with some of our old neighbours, I confess." Yes, we must not neglect our old neighbours. But if these soldiers are quicker than the other people in the ballroom, what are young ladies to do?" "I think there is no occasion for their engaging themselves so many dances beforehand, Mr. Edwards." "No, perhaps not, but I remember, my dear, when you and I did the same." This seems to confirm my estimate of there only being 8 dances all night, because Mary only had 3 partners all night, one of whom she danced with twice, and it was customary to dance 2 dances before changing partners. In Pride and Prejudice, the Meryton assemblies were able to squeeze in 6 pairs of dances and the boulangère, which makes me think that it wasn't very well attended, which is not too surprising for a small town. It's also possible that they capped the number of dancers in each set to keep them short, which is something that we see in assembly room rules that cap the number of couples in each set to as few as 12, though others allow as many as 20 or no defined limit at all. In her letters, Jane Austen consistently gives accounts of dancing more than 8 dances in an evening, but she was also from a small town in rural Hampshire, and her letters are also full of laments at the lack of attendance at the local balls. If it were the case of Meryton being a very small assembly, Mr. Darcy's refusing to dance would have been even more noticeable and rude because partners would have been all the more in demand, and the fact that he had been overheard refusing to be introduced to a dance partner would have compounded the offense. Returning to the Watsons, however, I also noticed that Mr. and Mrs. Edwards complain about young people booking dances in advance while admitting that they did it themselves in their youth. Indeed, dance cars didn't become popular in the UK, from what I can tell, until after the Regency, when shorter dances like the waltz, polka, and quadrille became fashionable, and you would change partners more often. So finally, let's look at the dialogue in a later scene between Emma and the foppish Mr. Musgrove. "What a famous ball we had last night," he cried after a short pause. "How long did you keep it up after the Osbornes and I went away?" "We had 2 dances more. It is making too much fatigue, I think, to stay so late. I suppose your set was not a very full one." "Yes, quite as full as ever, except the Osbornes. There seemed no vacancy anywhere, and everybody danced with uncommon spirit to the very last." Sets did tend to dwindle near the end of the evening, as we saw in Mansfield Park, when people would start to get tired and go home. But that's clearly not the case at this assembly ball. I attribute this to the fact that assembly balls tend to end much earlier than private balls, which I mentioned in my analysis of Pride and Prejudice. Whereas in Mansfield Park, they expected to keep the dancing going until 5, at this assembly, if they had tea around 11, they should probably be finished by around 1 or a little after. Still, both Emma and Mr. Musgrove seem to think it's somewhat remarkable that so many people stayed and continued to dance energetically until the end. And that wraps up my analysis of dance references in Jane Austen's novels. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and subscribe for more content. As I said, I do a regular series called Jane Austen on Point, where I analyze the dancing in Jane Austen adaptations for historical accuracy. If you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon where you can enjoy benefits like ad-free versions and early access to new videos. Thank you so much, and as always, have an ostentatiously good day.